Today, we're going to talk about the president's power to make recess appointments. And you're like, Mark, why should we in the Second Amendment community care about recess appointments under Article 2 of the Constitution? What meaning does this have to us? It actually could have quite a bit of impact on our right to keep and bear arms. We're going to break it down and make you the smartest person in the room when it comes to our Constitution when we get right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of the brand new law review article that you can get for free down below. The Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy has published my most recent bit of scholarship, an article entitled Dangerous but Not Unusual, Mistakes Commonly Made by Courts in Post-Bruen Litigations. Basically, this talks about all the errors that have been made by lower courts in the last couple years after the Bruen decision and explains how they can be fixed. So it's a very important article for the Second Amendment community. If you're a lawyer, a law clerk, a scholar, a historian, whatever it is, you definitely want to read my article in the Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy associated with the Georgetown Law School. Check it out. And I should also note that this Saturday, live on the internet and beyond, I will be speaking on a panel involving the Second Amendment at this year's National Lawyers Convention at the Federalist Society, and the moderator of the panel will be none other than Judge Amal Thapar, a potential future Supreme Court pick. We'll talk all about that in just a bit, but check it out on Saturday. I'll put a link to that later, and we'll talk more about that panel discussion involving the Second Amendment and my speech as we get closer to that date. All right, folks, so there's a lot of debate going on right now on X and in the media about who should be the replacement for Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell. Right now, on Tuesday, according to the reporting, there will be a vote by Republican senators about who will be the Senate majority leader, when the Republicans take over the Senate, the U.S. Senate, in January. Now, there are three contenders for the moment. Senator Rick Scott out of Florida, Senator John Thune, and Senator John Cornyn. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of this right here, right now, other than, of course, you know my view is there was absolutely nobody worse in the United States Senate, from my point of view, other than Democrats, than Senator John Cornyn for doing what he did to us in 2022 by actively taking the lead to negotiate our rights away, by helping to enact, not just voting for, but actually negotiating and writing the Bipartisan Gun Control Act that gave Joe Biden and the anti-gunners a huge win in June of 2022 at literally the same time that we were winning NYSERPA versus Bruen in the U.S. Supreme Court. So as far as I'm concerned, anybody will be better than John Cornyn as a Senate Majority Leader. But again, I don't get a vote, so it doesn't really matter what I think. But that's what I think, and that's what I've said. We can always debate other people, but I just want to make sure, in my view, that John Cornyn does not get that role. He should not be rewarded for being a traitor to the Second Amendment as far as I'm concerned. That's just my opinion. All right, so with that said, I want to talk about a critical issue that's come up that's a little geeky, but I want you to understand it's not that hard. This is going to be really, really easy for you to understand, but it's the sort of thing that you may not have thought of. You may see it in the paper. You may not know what it means. I want to make it really easy, and that is a presidential authority to make what are known as recess appointments. Recess appointments, okay? We're going to break it down this way. We have the United States Constitution, the supreme law of the land. It has three main articles for the purpose of this discussion. Article 1 talks about the powers of the Congress, the senators, and the House of Representatives. Article 2 of the United States Constitution talks about presidential powers, the powers of the President of the United States, the powers of the executive branch. And Article 3 addresses the powers and authority of the U.S. Supreme Court and federal judges, federal courts. So I want to talk about this power under Article 2 of the United States Constitution that the President has. That is the power, authority to make recess appointments. Now, the way this works is this. Currently, in the normal course, if the president were going to nominate, let's say, Mark Smith or Vivek or you or Brandon Herrera to a position that requires a presidential appointment, could be the cabinet, could be to become the United States Secretary of State, could be the director of the ATF, whatever. The normal process of appointing and confirmation goes this way, and you're familiar with it. It's like the same way for federal judges, same thing for federal judges, and that is this. The president would nominate you to that position and would refer that nomination formally to the United States Senate, not to the House of Representatives, but to the U.S. Senate. The United States Senate would hold hearings and would ultimately vote on whether or not to confirm, sometimes referred to as to give advice and consent to the president on the confirmation of that nominee. So, for example, let's take Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. You're all familiar with that. President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. That was referred to the United States Senate. The United States Senate had hearings, had a vote, and voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, that's the normal way this works. But there's a different way this can be done. Listen carefully. That is, you can, as president, have the power as president to make recess appointments to those same exact positions that would otherwise require the confirmation by the United States Senate. The recess appointments arise when the United States Senate goes into a formal official recess. And you know what a recess is? It's a break. Now, at the time of the founding, it was understood and conceived that the United States Congress, the United States Senate, would go into recess for months on end. Because back then it took a while to travel by horse from Boston to Washington to Philadelphia, right? You get the point, to Savannah. So because it took so long to travel, it was understood and anticipated that the United States Senate would have long periods of recess. And to make sure that the president could continue to operate the government effectively, the notion of a recess appointment arose and was actually written into the Constitution. Specifically, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution provides as follows. The president shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the United States Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. So that language is found in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, giving that power to the president. And why would a president use this? And how would this come up? Well, again, as I pointed out, it was anticipated at the time of the founding there would be long periods of time where the U.S. Senate would be away, in recess, not conducting business. So what does it mean to be in recess? It means you're not in a position to legally authorize or act or transact business. You're out of session. You're in recess. Now, of course, in the modern times, unfortunately from my point of view, the U.S. Senate is rarely in recess. They're always around screwing up our rights, spending our money, bankrupting the country. Okay? So there are not a lot of recesses anymore. But this has come up just recently in this fight over who should be the next U.S. Senate, the Senate Majority Leader for the Republicans. And the reason why recess appointments can be valuable to a president is, let's say you have somebody controversial that you want to put into a position for a period of 1 or 2 years. I mean, the time can vary. We're not going to get into how you calculate this. But for the sake of argument, assume that somebody that's pointed to a position as a recess pick, as a recess appointee, will basically be in that position from somewhere between 1 to 2 years. And that's it. The reason why this can be important is, let's say you have a very controversial person, like Ron Paul. And let's say you want to appoint Ron Paul to a position that theoretically, while the president might want him in a role, the U.S. Senate might not confirm him because he might be unduly controversial, for the sake of argument. So when the U.S. Senate goes into recess, that allows the president to literally pick anybody he wants and put him or her into a position of authority for 1 to 2 years as a recess appointment. So this is a political weapon that can be used. Now, as a practical matter, it may or may not be that relevant with a Republican Senate of 53 Republican senators and President Trump, because it's quite likely and hopefully the case that the 53 Republican senators will be able to rush through and vote to confirm Donald Trump's cabinet officials and other senior officers and judges, including the director of the ATF if he decides to appoint one. Okay? So with that said, though, Donald Trump, I think, wants the opportunity to at least have an arrow in his quiver that the U.S. Senate will periodically go into recess and that the Senate Majority Leader, whoever that may be, will agree to periodically put the U.S. Senate into recess, which would allow Donald Trump to expedite the appointment of particular people without having to delay and slow down in the process of going through the U.S. Senate. So there may be instances where Donald Trump, as president, wants to rush someone to a position so they can be in that position again for 1 to 2 years and bypass Senate confirmation. Now, by bypassing Senate confirmation, it means their appointment cannot be for the duration of the presidency. It can only be for a limited period of time, usually, like I said, between anywhere from 9 months to a year to maybe upwards, possibly theoretically, to 2 years. But mostly you're looking at an appointment of a year or so. So the reason why that's important is there may be somebody you want to get into that role for a year, but they're not going to be there permanently unless they are actually voted on and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. But Donald Trump wants this ability to be able to put people in these positions using the recess appointment process under certain circumstances to expedite the process. But again, the only way a recess appointment can legally occur and the president can legally exercise this power and authority under Article 2 is if the U.S. Senate goes into recess. Now, the reason why this can be an issue is, let's say Chuck Schumer ran the U.S. Senate. He could decide to never, ever, ever call a recess and that the U.S. Senate would never be in recess, which means a Republican president could never make a recess appointment to the federal bench or to the cabinet or as an ambassador or whatnot because this U.S. Senate was never in recess. So again, if you're a Republican and you want the president to occasionally have an opportunity to rush someone through and get them on in some position of authority and influence for some fast reason, you may want the U.S. Senate to go into recess for a couple weeks, allowing the president to make a recess appointment under certain circumstances. Now, as to what those may be, I don't know. I'm not in charge of the White House. That's up to President Trump and the U.S. Senate. But I do want you to understand the importance and potential value to President Trump to these potential recess appointments. So when you're reading about recess appointments and Donald Trump and the United States Senate and the next Senate leader for the Republicans, I want you to understand what this recess appointment process means. The benefit to a recess appointment is the speed at which you can get somebody into a position to get working for the president's agenda. The downside to it, it's not permanent. It's not going to last until the end of President Trump's term. It's only good for a period of a year to two between the time the recess starts and the time the Senate comes back and then recesses again. There's some technical reasons made to measure this. You don't need to know it other than you should assume that anybody who is appointed as a recess appointee by this president will likely be in that slot for between 1 and 2 years, but not for the entire 4 years of the Trump administration. All right, folks, hope you learned something here today. Make sure you follow me on X at 4Boxes Diner. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. We're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers as best we can and catch up to the other Second Amendment channels. Make sure you like this video and share it with your friends. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon here at the 4Boxes Diner, named after, of course, the 4 boxes of American liberty. We'll see you again soon.
Orders up. Table 2A.